Welcome to Women Entrepreneurs Radio with your host, Deborah Bailey. When I started this podcast in 2008, I was on a mission to promote women business owners, creatives, and entrepreneurs. In each episode, my guests provide resources, valuable tips, and inspiration. Women Entrepreneurs Radio is about showing women how to harness their natural strength to achieve success on their own terms. Did you know that you can find the Women Entrepreneurs Radio podcast on many podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and YouTube also? If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please take a moment to share your feedback and a review. 5 stars is always great, because the more that you share your feedback, the easier it will be for the show to be found by more listeners. So I hope you'll take a moment to do that. And as well, you can stop by the blog, womenentrepreneursradio.com, and you can find extended bios of the show guests and articles and announcements of interest to women business owners. So please make sure you stop by the blog and also subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Oh, wait, before you go, you can also stop by dbaileycoach.com to find out more about my nonfiction books and about my online writing courses for fiction authors. And dbaileycoach.com/brightbooks is where you'll find my paranormal and fantasy romance novels. And now, let's get started with the show. Hi everyone, welcome to Women Entrepreneurs Radio, and I'm your host, Deborah Bailey. And now I'm going to introduce my guest, Leah Dean. And Leah Dean is a coach, speaker, author, and former chief human resources executive who has worked with leaders throughout the world to build high-performing teams or tribes for 20 years. A passionate believer in assembling tribes for greatest impact, Leah is the founder of numerous programs and events designed to help women and girls find their tribes and do great things. So welcome to the show, Leah.
Thank you, Deborah. It's so nice to be here. I'm excited about our conversation.
And so am I. So before we get into your book, Assemble the Tribe, and I really am interested to find out more of your thoughts from that. But before we get started, could you please share with us how you got started in the work that you're doing?
How much time do you have? So I guess if I had to go back and share a little bit about my story, I grew up in a family of 6, and, you know, in some ways that was my first tribe, right? Our families are our most essential tribes. And we grew up on a very small island. So I live in Bermuda, but we grew up on an even smaller island. We call it our 23-acre island. It was Bermuda's first airport. And so I spent a lot of time as a child with just my brothers and my sisters. And that was my tribe. But because that small little island was an island campground during the summers, we'd have hundreds of people that would, you know, descend on this tiny little island. And so my childhood experience was one of, you know, having these moments where there were lots of people that I could connect with, and then these other moments of isolation. And, you know, one of the beautiful things that I was able to learn as a child is just watching my parents kind of throw our doors open to anyone who came to the island. And that really taught me about what it means to be open. And that's a concept that I talk about in the book. Now, fast forward, I live in Bermuda. If you know anything about Bermuda, insurance, reinsurance, international business is one of the pillars of our economy. And so I moved into that space. I ended up through no work on my own part. I just ended up in HR. And I think we for me, that was where I was supposed to be. I was supposed to be in a career that allowed me to kind of bring together my passion for, research and analytics, but also my passion for people. And so that's where I spent 20 years of my journey, helping people to build better teams, helping them to connect, to, be able to leverage those teams for businesses to deliver great results, but in a way that was done through what I call the power of team. I always used to tell my team we're better together than we are on our own. And so fast forward a little bit further to the end of my career in the corporate space, I decided to take a break after 20 years of, working at, breakneck speed, to spend some time with my family. Again, back to that most essential tribe. That's where I started, and that's where I ended my career, and write a book. And that book was supposed to be a passion project. And my plan was actually to return to the corporate world. But the more I wrote, the more I've talked to people about the book, the more I've coached women around the concepts in my book, I just knew that this next phase of my life journey is to help people to assemble their tribes. So that's the Cliff Notes version of my story.
And it makes a lot of sense that then it would lead you to write this book and touch on all of these issues in the way that you have. So, I do have a question getting started, in the sense this is a podcast that focuses on women entrepreneurs. When you're writing your book, what was your motivation to say that you really want to focus more on women and how they can use these concepts?
So I think my passion for women, and it's interesting because if you would have asked me 15 years ago if I would be writing a book and I have a business that's based around women, I would have said no way. That wasn't necessarily my passion at the time. But in 2017, I started a women's conference with a group of friends, and I learned that no matter if it's 2 women or 10,000, I've been to all kinds of events and put on my own. There's something really unique and special that happens when you put a group of women in a room. And our issues that we have to navigate, they're not better. They're just different. The challenges that we have balancing work life and home life, the nuances around what it means to be mothers and nurturers. There is a difference in the way that resonates for us as women. And so I wanted to dedicate my work to help women develop both personally and professionally, because we tend to focus on one or the other. And I just found in my own work that we are holistic human beings, and we need to focus on all of the parts of who we are and all of the aspects of our wellness. And so my work just kind of naturally led me to this place where I was focused on both. And then after one of our events, I went to sleep at about 2 a.m. And at 5, I was up like a light bulb and with an attitude, because I don't really like to wake up that early in the morning. But I sat down and I wrote the entire outline for Assemble the Tribe. I tell folks it was divinely inspired. I wrote it all in one sitting. And so I knew that this was a message that I was supposed to share.
And that's fantastic that you actually did get that information and then you follow through, because a lot of times people get ideas and then they just don't really do anything with them or talk themselves out of it, that it's not really that important. And I think that's something that often women do, maybe because they get the idea that their ideas aren't really important. And also often women entrepreneurs have the motivation to go do something, or the idea, and then they figure, well, why should I bother? This isn't important. Someone else has already done this. So, from your perspective, how do you feel that a women entrepreneur can use this information that you're sharing?
So that's a loaded question. And when I speak with women entrepreneurs, I'm early on this journey myself. Now, that said, I come from a family of entrepreneurs. My parents are entrepreneurs, both my brother, my sister-in-law. And so I've lived around entrepreneurship my entire life. And my book is about assembling tribes and bringing people together. And most women entrepreneurs are solopreneurs, right? They're doing it on their own. And what I found is in my research, when you have a strong, healthy tribe around you, not only are they, if it's healthy, they can actually have an impact on your health as well. So the research will show that if we are isolated, lonely, or we have poor quality relationships, that has an impact on our health. It makes us more susceptible to certain diseases such as cancer, high blood pressure, diabetes. And so as women entrepreneurs, when we have so much on our plates, just having the right group of people around us can go a long way in helping us live healthier, happier lives. They say that people who are in low quality relationships on average and isolated on average, their mortality increases by 29%. And so if you want to live longer as a woman entrepreneur and you have so much to do, one of the things you want to do is surround yourself with a group of people that are going to pour into you and help you to be healthy. Secondly, what I'm finding is that women entrepreneurs who take the time to invest in a tribe, that tribe can open doors that you don't even know are there. And so as I've been strengthening and building my network, just today I was on a call with one of my coaches and she said, oh, I know this person and they can help you with X, Y, and Z. And so when you're investing in those relationships and carving out the time, and when I say investing, be intentional. When we were going out before the pandemic, every Thursday, I called it Tribe Thursday. I would go out and I would have coffee and I would have lunch and I would have dinners, and I would be very intentional about making those connections. And when you invest time in people and you support them and you help them, then they can open doors that you sometimes don't know are there or that you need support to open up. And then I would say, so those are just some of the reasons why I think that as women entrepreneurs, we need to have tribes. It can be a very lonely existence. And when you can jump on a call with a group of women who understand what you've been through and can support you, then that can really, really help you thrive in your business in a way that is meaningful.
Yes, and that definitely is important because a lot of times you're saying being a solopreneur, the person may not necessarily feel like they have a lot of people around them, or maybe their family is supportive or is not supportive. Other friends may not understand because they aren't in that environment. So it can be hard to have people to draw on who give the proper support. So that makes perfect sense. And I could see how this could be important for women entrepreneurs in particular to learn from. But also in your book, and I guess we can get a little bit more into those conversations as well, your formula of believe plus belong equals be different. And could you elaborate a little bit on how you came up with that?
Well, before I share about the formula, there's one other foundational concept that really blew my mind with writing the book. And I want to share that and then lead us into the formula. So when I started to write the book, that morning when I woke up and I wrote the outline, one of my beliefs at that moment was that a tribe was a group of people. And when I talked about group, I meant 3 or more, like a large group. I had a tribe. There were 10 of us at one point. Now there are 8. And I thought if I could just teach women how to create these larger, healthy groups, then I would have given the world a gift. But what I learned in the process of writing the book is that tribes are not just large groups of people. I mean, I had to pull the word apart and then put it back together because it can be a very emotional and sometimes divisive word. And so as I conducted the research in terms of what it is, it's complicated, it's complex. A tribe is a group. Well, a group is 2 or more. So that means our one-on-one relationships are part of our tribes. The groups that we form are part of our tribes. And then there's all of these other people that we tend to connect with on a day-to-day basis. And so the question I had to answer is, well, what do we do with them? I met a woman last week. She has the same number of siblings that I do. She talks about tribes all the time on her podcast. There were just so many things about our life experiences that were aligned, and we immediately had this connection because our beliefs and our values were similar. And so, that was one of the biggest learnings, is that tribe is not what we think it is. It's not just the groups we form. It's all of the relationships. And at its highest level, in order for us to be successful in those relationships, we have to shift the way that we think. So then the question is, well, how do you shift how you're thinking if tribe is a mindset? And the simplified definition that I wrote is a tribe is a tribe is individually complex people who choose to come together with similar values, beliefs, and create in various ways to create relationship. And so you bring that group together, but then the question becomes, well, how do I help the tribe thrive? And that's where I came up with the formula. And I have the story for how I actually inked the formula is in the book. So I won't tell you all of that, but in its simplest form, the formula for how we build our tribes is believe plus belong equals be different. And the simple explanation of that is, if you believe in your value and you have found any place to belong, and we know based on what I just said, that could be one-on-one, that could be in groups, that could be the organizations and people that we choose to affiliate with, then the idea with the formula is that we should be able to leverage that belief and belonging. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute, to be more open to new people. A lot of times when we find these places that help us to feel safe, we become entrenched, and we exclude other people because we found our tribe, we're safe, right? But what I've learned is that because I have my best friend, because I have that strong group of girlfriends, I can be more open to everybody else. Worst case scenario, I experience rejection, and that's normal. But I've learned that I can survive that rejection because I've put in the work and I have these strong tribes. And because I stay open, I have the opportunity to add new people to my tribe. And so that's really the way the formula works. If you believe in your value, and it has to start with you, if you don't believe that you're worth it, then you take a broken person into your tribe or your group relationships and you break them. And it starts with you, then it transfers into the places where you choose to belong and find belonging. And then that allows you to just be different, be more open, and really start to thrive.
Well, that's a wonderful way to define how a tribe can be really beneficial for people, because a lot of times they may not see the advantages of working with others or banding together with others or seeing who they can really work with. And I think particularly in entrepreneurship, as far as corporate, it has its own challenges, I've found, but in terms of entrepreneurship and that kind of thing, I think sometimes that people don't really appreciate how they can work together with others, because there are too many people, I think too often, who go into it looking for something, but they're not really giving anything.
And in the book, I tell folks, don't take my word for it. The first thing that I do in the first 3 chapters is almost lay out what I would call the business case for why we need our tribes. This is not, Leah had a great group and has been hanging out with them for 20 years. And so therefore it is actually scientifically, critical for all of us to engage in healthy relationships, because it will help us to sustain and enjoy longer lives. There was a doctor that I interviewed while I was writing the book, and she did a landmark study around women in China who were recovering from cancer, breast cancer. And what they found in their research, they said it actually surprised them, but they found that women who had a stronger social network, their breast cancer reoccurrence and mortality rates were meaningfully lower than people who didn't have a support network. And so when we talked about it, because I called her up, of course, I was curious to hear about the research study. She said, Leah, what I've learned through kind of the results and seeing the impact is that, 9 times out of 10, it's inevitable that at some point in our lives, we're going to deal with some kind of health or personal crisis. And what the research is showing is that if we invest in our tribe relationships, and make sure that they're healthy before we encounter, a catastrophic illness like a cancer, you will actually increase your likelihood that you will survive because you have those strong relationships. And so even the formula is the formula. That's for how you thrive. But I just want people to remember that our relationships are not optional. They are so important for our survival. And if you think about what's happened in the past year with the pandemic and everyone coming inside and the isolation and the loneliness, we need to rethink our relationships now more than ever before.
Well, that definitely has had a big impact on how everything is being done, particularly business and just, of course, it's just one aspect of humanity, and everybody has been affected in many different ways, but that's also something people had to go online for a lot of things. And there has, of course, been a thriving online presence for business, but for some people, this is something completely new and they're not used to it. And they've had to find ways to kind of, I could say, pivot or move their businesses more to the online, or understand how they could take advantage of that. And of course, that also leads to different ways of communicating with other people, and in particular with clients and customers. How can they reach them now? Because they're not really used to this kind of, way of being, a way of communicating, way of having their business. And it's kind of making everybody shift in how they look at how they're interacting with others.
Yeah. And so I think for women entrepreneurs, you make a really great point. Many of us have had to shift and learn how to do things differently. And so what I've found is, because of the power of my tribe, they have been able to help me accelerate my ability to shift in this new environment, whether it's new technologies or things that are going to make my business more efficient. There aren't enough hours in the day as a woman entrepreneur to research every aspect of what's going to make your business successful. I'm not an IT person. I'm not a social media expert, but when I tap into folks in my tribe who do have those skills, I'm not saying they're going to do it for me, but they accelerate my learning and my ability to either do it myself or to hire somebody and manage them with more competence than I would have had before. And so that's one of the other things that I talk about specifically for women entrepreneurs. When you take the time to invest in your tribe, they can increase your capacity and fill in gaps that you have in terms of what you need to run your business efficiently and effectively. And so, I'm thinking of one particular friend of mine, love her to death. She's written a book. She's a coach. She has her own business, has had for years. And once a month, we just check in with each other. We trade ideas. We share. She gives me ideas. We have projects that we talk about together and hold each other accountable for progress. And she has made my life so much better just because of the 1 hour that we choose to invest a month. It's worth it.
Definitely. So it sounds like you would really encourage listeners to form those kinds of groups or bonds where they are checking in regularly.
Absolutely. I mean, in the book, I cover all kinds of tribes. So there's the one-on-one relationships that I talk about. And then there are different kinds of groups, right? What I just talked about is what I would call a professional group, but there's also organic groups. There's, purpose groups. Like I have that women's conference where I've brought together groups of women on a volunteer basis to help other women develop. So we have a very specific purpose. There are life stage groups, like your college sorority or, your mom group. And sometimes those groups stay with you for life and sometimes they disband. So there are a couple of different types of groups. And in the book, I talk about this is what it is. This is why it's beautiful. And here's some of the challenges that you might have so that we can get a little bit better about navigating and keeping our groups and our tribes that we form healthy. So there's lots of different groups that can add value to our lives at different times.
Yes, and that's very true. And I think also in terms of, I guess, the corporate culture, the work culture, do you also see a lot of changes there as well in terms of how business is really going to have to deal with their employees in these kinds of environments?
I think, of course. I mean, if everything from the physical location and what collaboration means and looks like, to how we work. I mean, everything about this last year has challenged us. And so, one of the challenges that we used to talk about, prior to the pandemic in my organizations was, how do we be more effective leaders in a virtual environment? Well, and how do we build teams in a virtual environment? Well, for those organizations who hadn't really mastered that, I think the pandemic has forced us to think about it. And I heard one leader give a really, really great answer. And he said, listen, if you are leading a virtual team, then you need to think about, what would you do with somebody if they were right next to you? If you were sitting in the office with me, Deb, I would come in, I would say, good morning. We might stop and grab a cup of coffee and talk. He said, I have to go out of my way to create some of those experiences for my virtual team. Otherwise, I'm not building the relationships that we need in order to work effectively. And so I often say, and this is my firm belief, is that when you take the time to keep the tribe, keep the group healthy, and invest in those one-on-one and group relationships, your team can work so much faster and more efficiently because they trust each other and they have a collective interest in success. So I think not only are tribes important in our personal lives and entrepreneurship, they're also really important in the corporate environment as well.
Yes, and that's true. And I think for some people in that environment, this has really been a challenge because it's maybe something they're just not used to, having to work in this way. And I think for some, it's maybe a challenge they really aren't wanting, because I know I've read different things about people working from home and some who really can't wait to get back to the office. And I know from my point of view, I was working from home before the pandemic. So to me, working from home is something I'm used to, and other people in my team are from all over the country. So it's something we've had to be able to interact already, before this came in. But I'm sure that for some, this is a completely new experience, and now they have to learn how to create these different relationships in a way that they're not always right there. As you were saying, they're not always there going for coffee or going for lunch or whatever may happen when you're right on site.
Yeah, I don't think virtual environments will ever replace that kind of physical connection. I think that that's important, but in the absence of it, I think that there are still ways that we can use the technology to our advantage to stay connected. And it doesn't always happen on work calls. Sometimes you have to be very intentional about building the relationships outside. I do a lot of virtual coffees just to spend some time connecting with people. And in that way, you're building your tribe. And then when it's time to get to work, you have the foundation to work together a bit better.
Mm-hmm. And that makes a lot of sense. So, Leah, could you please share where listeners can find out more about you and where they can find your book?
So you can, if you're interested in the book website is www.assemblethetribe.com, www.assemblethetribe.com. And in terms of where you can find me, as I mentioned earlier, I am definitely wading all feet into the world of social media. So I am on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. So I always tell everybody, come hang out with me wherever you are the most comfortable. I am growing and maturing my platforms, but you can find me on all of those platforms. And my handle is my name, at Leah J.M. Dean. J is Julie. That's my mom's name. M is Michelle. She said it sounded nice. So Leah J.M. Dean. And that's where I am on all the platforms.
Great. And I'm sure everybody's going to want to check out your book and also to find out more information that you're sharing. So also, other questions as far as for, say, younger women who are coming along? What's some advice that you could give to them as far as building these connections at this point in their lives?
The thing that I find with younger women is, and there's something that age and experience provides to you just in terms of your confidence. So many young women and girls, because I have a 13-year-old daughter, and so I kind of span the whole spectrum in terms of my experience and mentoring. So many of us, we struggle with who we are. And that has an impact on how we show up in our relationships with other women and in our places of work and in our communities. And so my number one piece of advice to young women is do the self-work. Understand who you are, understand what your gifts are that you can give to other people, and work at that and increase your level of self-awareness until you get to the place where every day you wake up believing that you have something to give. And that's why the first words in the tagline of the book, Believing Your Value, are so important, because value, it's worth, its utility, its importance, but belief, by definition, is a habit of the mind in which you build trust or confidence in a person or a thing. And so every day we kind of have to get up and say, here are the things that make me valuable, or here are the things that I want to acquire. I always tell everybody, you cannot give what you have not yet become, but you can sure work towards becoming whatever it is that you really want to be. But it's believing that wherever you are right now still has value and purpose. And I find that young women really struggle to believe that they are worth it, that they have value, and they get stuck in comparing themselves to other people or not necessarily setting boundaries. So the first part of my book, I actually spend 2 chapters just on me, because until I've done the work on myself, any relationship that I choose to embark on is probably going to meet with challenges, because instead of my saying, oh, when I walk into the room, what can I share with Deb? How can I help her? Instead, I might be thinking, oh, what does she think of me? And, maybe I didn't say that just right. And it stifles who we are as human beings and what our potential is in the world. So that's my advice for younger women. There's some work that we need to do on ourselves, and let's start there.
That makes sense also, because I think there's a lot of pressure on us in general, and particularly there's always been a lot of pressure on women to be certain things, that I guess the media and society and whatever else will always kind of say, well, you should be this, or you should show up this way, you should look this way. And all these pressures, of course, more coming down on younger women who are coming along and getting bombarded with all this. And I think with another layer of social media, seems to be then again something that's kind of telling them they're supposed to be a certain way. And then it gets to be a point where I think a lot of confidence, as you were mentioning, really gets lost, because people are just kind of beaten down to the point where they just don't have the confidence in who they are or trying to become. And then it would seem that in that case, having these tribes or relationships will help them to kind of reinforce them as they grow and kind of find their way in the world.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I have some really great friends. I was talking to one yesterday. And actually I talked about it today in my Facebook group, because I have every Monday I share a quote and leave a motivational thought. And this particular friend, she is an incredible artist. And so I was talking about her art and just how impressed and how amazing I thought it was that she could come up with ideas off the top of her head, or see something or dream something, and the next day she could create it. And I said to her, oh, I wish I could do that, but that is just not my gift. And she said to me, but there are things that you do, Leah, that I could not do even if I tried. And so what we talked about in the end was that all of us make our own types of art. She's an actual artist, but the work that I do, the events that I create, the programs that I create, that is my version of my art. And it still will make a difference and matter. And the quote that I shared today is, you are an original and there is no copy of an original. And so I think for young women and older women and any other guest that you have who is a supporter, I think we have to remember that we do have something that we can contribute. The question is, are you looking at somebody else's art, or are you grateful for the art that you are creating in your own unique way?
And that's important that people ask themselves that question and really try to reinforce themselves and keep that going as much as possible, because it's not always easy to do, and not easy to do for younger women or women who are in a corporate sector or building their own businesses and trying to maneuver through all the things that are happening or always can happen to kind of provide obstacles for them as they're building and growing. So these are things that are very important for all of us to keep in mind as we move forward. So Leah, this has been a wonderful conversation. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with us?
I guess I just summarize what we talked about, that, our tribes, they're not just groups. At its highest level, it's a way of thinking and choosing every day to show up with an open mindset in our relationships. And the simple formula that I want everybody to remember is believe. If I believe that I have value and I find places to belong and experiencing belonging, then I can have that tribe mindset. I can be different. I can find people who want to pour into me as much as I wish to pour into them. But it really comes down to changing the way that we think. And the last thing that I would say is, we're still in a pandemic. We're still being pulled apart. Some of us are still isolated. And in order to live our healthiest, best lives, we need people. And frankly, they need us. So I would just encourage people to go out and build your tribes, or to be that person who creates a tribe for somebody else. It will make a difference for you, because there's something beautiful that happens when you give the best parts of who you are to other people. It tends to come back to you in spades. So I just say those are the few things I'd like for everyone to remember, and just to go out and assemble their tribes.
Well, thank you so much, Leah, for joining me and giving all this wonderful advice and sharing your story and sharing with us your thoughts and motivations for writing your book. It's really appreciated. I'm sure that the listeners and readers are really going to take away a lot from this. So I want to thank you again for joining us today.
You are so welcome, Deborah, and it's been great to be here. Thank you for having me.
And everyone, I know you enjoyed the show. Please remember to share this on social media and share it with your friends, and also to stop by and leave a review or feedback, particularly if you are on Apple Podcasts, because that always helps the show to be found by more listeners. So once again, it's been Women Entrepreneurs Radio with your host, Deborah Bailey. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you again next time. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to stop by womenentrepreneursradio.com to read extended bios of the show guests, and also find links there for their websites and any offers that they have shared with you. And stop by our Facebook page at facebook.com/womenentrepreneurs.